Imagine for a moment a world without art, without dance, opera, literature, poetry. That world would be a very, very dull place.
Today on the show, we have Lon Strickler. He was a paranormal researcher, author, and publisher of the syndicated Phantom and Monsters blog. Several of these published reports have been presented on various television segments, including the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Sci-Fi's Paranormal Witness, Fact or Faked Paranormal Files, Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America, and he's the author of 8 books. But today we are talking about his book, Mothman Dynasty, Chicago's Winged Humanoids. You can follow with Lon at his website, www.phantomsandmonsters.com, for all your cryptozoological needs. Lon, thanks for coming on the show. Before we got into the Mothman, though, I would like to go ahead and talk with you about something I saw on your website actually today. It was from April 1st. There was another Bigfoot sighting in Oregon. How long has that been going on for?
About 15 years.
And was there, anything new or in particular about this most recent sighting?
Well, this was a very interesting sighting. And in fact, I'm trying to get somebody to go to the location and check it out. The gentleman who contacted me was telling me about an incident that happened back in 2005 where, a man's from Portland, but he goes out to his property, Wallowa County, Oregon,
mm-hmm.
and he and his wife have a trailer out there and some property. And one day he was out there, and this was during the summer when they spend time out there. He said he had to travel 150 miles to work to meet a client. And he didn't ride back to the trailer until early evening. So it was kind of still light out. So when he pulled up the trailer, he said he noticed that the outdoor furniture was busted up and strewn all over the place. He said he walked around the trailer and he noticed some deep scratch marks on the bottom corner of the trailer home.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing he thought was maybe a cougar was, caused the damage. So he entered the door into the trailer and called out to his wife, and there was no answer. Now, he was concerned because she usually would meet him if he pulled up, and she didn't. So he slowly walked through the hallway towards the bedroom, continuing calling her name. And as he entered the bedroom, his wife was sitting up on the bed, shaking frantically while pointing a .357 Magnum directly at him. She was also crying and possibly in shock.
Yeah.
He slowly walked around the bed and removed the gun from her hands. Now, she explained to him that earlier during the afternoon, she heard loud crashing sounds coming from the outside of the trailer. And when she looked out the window, she saw what she said was an 8-foot Bigfoot tossing the outdoor furniture about. And apparently she screamed and ran back to her bedroom and grabbed the handgun. And as she stood there hoping that the beast wouldn't break into the trailer, she felt a violent shaking. And apparently the Bigfoot had attempted to lift the trailer, which caused the scratch marks.
Yeah.
So then what she did, she then cowered onto the bed and sat there waiting for the unknown to occur, and she was possibly there for several hours. So a few nights later, the witness said that he and his wife were in bed, and that he was suddenly awakened by a rancid odor that he described as smelling like raw liver. Now, I never heard that term before, but that was interesting. So he said there's no sound. So he got out of bed and looked out the screen window, which was elevated about 6.5 foot from the ground outside. And as he looked into the darkness, a large round face appeared in front of him. And as it moved forward just inches away to the screen. Now, the witness immediately yelled out to the beast, and it replied back with a tremendous roaring sound. And he told me he was like 6 inches nose to nose from this thing.
Whoa.
So his wife was now awake, and he had backed off away from the screen. This Bigfoot continued to look at him with large brown eyes, and then he was so close that he noticed that the irises on this thing were brilliant green. The head and face were round as opposed to conical and covered in draping dark hair. And when the Bigfoot roared, the large canine teeth were clearly visible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he said after about 45 minutes or so, the Bigfoot backed off. He grabbed the 357 and ran out the door in order to confront this thing. And as he turned the corner, the Bigfoot looked towards the river and looked towards him and ran off towards the river. Now, he said he shot 3 rounds off but failed to hit it, though he said he wasn't really trying to hurt it. He was actually afraid that if he'd injure it, it would cause more problems. So the next day, he was telling his neighbor about the incident. And the man was well aware of this Bigfoot's presence, as it made itself known to him on a few occasions. So as the two men were talking, they heard the neighbor's mule braying from the corral below. They looked in the direction of the ruckus and witnessed the Bigfoot apparently taunting the mule. The neighbor grabbed his shotgun, fired it into the air, and the Bigfoot ran off. Now, he said this type of activity has been going on since that summer in 2005. And he is positive that there's a family group in a certain area in what he calls the lava flats or lava field. It's an ancient lava field near there.
Yeah.
And he said that there's also a boneyard from dead deer and sheep nearby, and as well as other physical evidence that he secured. So like I said, I'm in the process of securing an investigator to go on site to the location, talk to him, and investigate it.
Well, I mean, I could definitely see that, though, because over by the lava flats, there'd have to be a lot of caverns in that area. I mean, just, based on the geographic region. So there'd be a lot of, ability for those big feet, as it were, there being multiple to, kind of hide out, to be able to go out, forage, and do what they need to do, and then come back and, gather in their groups. So how many Bigfoot do you think that they had out there?
Oh, he doesn't know. He said he knows there's multiple out there.
Yeah.
He said he doesn't know if it's a family group or maybe several males or whatever. But he said that this one Bigfoot has been seen several times in the past 15 years. And now he doesn't spend all his time there. He lives in Portland, but the people around there have been telling him of sightings. So. There's probably a pretty decent group out there. They've got plenty to feed on, because apparently the United States Wildlife Agency actually put Dall sheep and elk in that area in the past decade.
Sheep.
Yeah, Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, they put. He said that some of the bones that were in this boneyard were of Dall sheep. So, they're pretty well fed.
Well, I mean, that makes perfect sense, though, if they would have, put all the sheep and the elk up in that area at the time, like within the last decade, that would see why there's so many Bigfoot, generated to that area. I mean, if the feeding's good. But I don't know. You think it was maybe a one of the younger Bigfoot? Because I mean, I think a full-grown one would be able to flip that trailer, no problem. You'd think.
I don't know. He said this trailer pretty good size. So
Okay.
he told me, I don't know how many tons, but I think it was at least 6 tons.
Okay. Yeah, I was
So
thinking maybe like a
yeah,
camping trailer.
yeah. So it was it's pretty good size.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I mean, well, I mean, that's scary too because I mean, I don't know. I always hear, stories of like these individual Bigfoot, but I always have been more intrigued by the stories of like groups of Bigfoot in one area because, it kind of, I don't know, it kind of breaks the idea that it's just this one Bigfoot out there that so many people who don't really follow the subject seem to think it is. When I mean, it's multiple, it's a species, and people sometimes don't tend to realize that.
Well, you don't hear a whole lot about groups uh, in here in the eastern part of the country
Hmm.
and in areas where I just don't really believe that these are flesh and blood beings. I just put it this way: they may be flesh and blood, but I don't think they're indigenous.
Right.
I think a lot of cryptids, including some Bigfoot, are some type of interdimensional species of some type. Now, out in the Pacific Northwest, I do believe that there are flesh and blood or indigenous beings in that area, as well as some other areas like the skunk ape down in Florida and Georgia and
Right. Right.
parts of Louisiana and of course East Texas. So yeah, I do believe there are some indigenous groups, but most of the time, most of the sightings in this part of the country are of single Bigfoot. And I think there's another story there to be told.
Yeah, I like to think that there's, just maybe like a clear difference between those two types. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
one being a completely different species because one, for the most part, seems to be, more. I don't want to say group focused, but they tend to stay in their little regions. They tend to kind of avoid the limelight. But like, I mean, over in like the eastern part of the country, like there's a lot of. I mean, it's just more densely populated out there, so it makes a lot more sense that the Bigfoot would be able to get around there. Traveling interdimensionally and just kind of being able to open up pockets and appear.
Well, here in Pennsylvania and other states nearby, like West Virginia, Western Maryland, uh, other parts of New York, and there are a lot of open areas. There are a lot of wilderness areas still in these states, and you know, these aren't the only cryptids that people see out this way. There's a lot of activity, a lot of different stuff, and we just really are just scratching the surface, trying to explain the existence of some of these beings right now.
Hmm.
The interdimensional theory is convenient for the most part, but we just have not, we just not haven't proved it yet. You still got people that believe that these are all indigenous beings, flesh and blood beings. But the fact that we haven't seen the evidence supporting that tends to make many feel that, and this is something, there's something else to the story.
Yeah, yeah, and well, I don't know. There's something like almost mystical about Bigfoot as well, because I
Mm.
mean, he's the original cryptid in my mind. He's one of the oldest stories, and every culture, even we didn't really share cultures before. They all have their own indigenous myth about, whether it's the wild man or whether it's, an ape-like creature. Like they all have something similar in common. So like Bigfoot's always been timeless in that regard.
Hmm. Yeah, there are stories of these beasts going back many centuries here, and especially in North America.
Now, I don't know. I guess since we don't hear too much about Bigfoot in groups, do they have any sort of Is there any like theories about how they kind of organize themselves into like packs, or I guess it'd be more of a tribe like scenario then. I mean, do they have like a social hierarchy of any kind?
I don't know. It does seem from some of the evidence that it is like a tribal type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not large groups. I think mostly if there is a group, it's a family group. I don't know how much mixing there is between, families or whatever. I think they kind of, they try to stick to a smaller group for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
That's just from some of the evidence and mostly anecdotal evidence that we've had over the years. Though, hopefully technology will kind of, open that up a little more eventually so we get some more idea of what's really going on.
Oh yeah, particularly with like drone technology as well, being able to
Yeah.
like, cover land that, I mean, it would take hours upon hours to be able to hike up into. Um, but I don't know. I mean, you were saying in that region that like food is plentiful. Like, why do you think certain Bigfoot want to, come and interact with humans? I mean, do you think that do you think that they're just scrounging in looking for food? Or do you think they're after certain things that they bring back to the tribe?
I don't really think they do it intentionally for the most part. There may be a few rogue beings out there.
Yeah.
I think there have been stories of kidnappings and such for years, especially in the British Columbia, up around that area, the Pacific Northwest. You don't hear a lot of that around here or in other parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if there is some type of contact, it's either that they feel threatened or they just happenstance come across somebody or somebody comes across them.
Now I'm unfamiliar with Bigfoot's doing kidnappings. That's yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Is it just do they target like certain kinds of people? Are they kidnapping? I mean, kids? Is it like I don't know? Is there any like pattern in why they kidnap?
Well, there have been theories about possible kidnappings, and of course there have been stories for years about certain individuals who say they have experienced being kidnapped by one of these beings. But there's an area in British Columbia, the highway tiers, where a lot of females, especially Native American females,
Mm-hmm.
have just disappeared along this highway. And it could be that they were actually abducted by somebody driving down the highway,
Right, right.
but there have been very few remains found, and the high number of actual missing females, plus the well-known population of Bigfoot in the area, tends to support the theory that these may be kidnappings by these beings.
So let me ask you: do you think that do they like hills have eyes them? Do they just take them off, use them for sexual pleasure and then eat them, or is it maybe like I don't know? I don't want to say something more innocent like a companion, but type of loneliness if it's a lone Bigfoot. But I don't know, man. The prior seems like it's more of a logical assumption.
Well, I really don't know a whole lot about it, that as opposed to others who have looked into it.
Right, right.
Many feel that when a woman is going through menstruation, that they can somehow sense it through either smell or whatever,
Oh yeah. Well, I
and
mean,
that
your dog can
they
sense
do
it.
attack them. Right? It's just like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just like any animal. So when they go into season, so I believe that may be something to that explanation, but who knows? I mean, there's no real proof of that.
Yeah. Now it seems like the big. I mean, assuming that these kidnappings in these stories are accurate, right? It seems like the Bigfoot in that area are a little bit more aggressive than the Bigfoot, that would be down in, United States Northwest. Do you find like, different aggression levels or different kinds of attacks or sightings are more prevalent in different regions? And then, do those different regions just have, I don't know, different temperament or behavior patterns?
I think most of the aggression, most of the stories of these things showing some sort of aggression are up in the Pacific Northwest, and some down in the southern part of the country. So I don't know what it is, but it does seem that's where most of the aggressive reports have germinated from.
So let me ask you: do you think the more interdimensional ones then are just limited to a certain geographic region out east, or do you think each one's in different region have that ability or access to that ability?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, this is something that we really haven't been able to figure out. The only thing that we believe, for the most part, ties this in is, first of all, they seem to show up suddenly and to vanish suddenly, or there's UFO activity around them, or some type of orb or other type of paranormal activity around them as well. So, the fact that this is associated with with it tends to make one think that there's something more to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I always found the interdimensional kind of cryptos, I don't know, the most interesting, which is, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you today was about the Mothman, because, as far as, cryptids that are, of the 20th century, the Mothman just stands out as the most infamous and, the most recognizable pop culture wise.
Yeah, this is something that has really been going on for a long time, but because of the Point Pleasant incidents back in '66 and '67, it just became more pronounced. And the fact that there was a tragedy that occurred during the same time these sightings just tended to spur the interest somewhat, a bit more, especially since 46 people lost their lives during the bridge collapse.
Right.
I don't really buy into the Harbinger theory. I never really have. I think the Mothman, as well as some of these other winged humanoids, are either summoned beings, or they're able to come in and out of different dimensions through a portal or some type of rift, in the fabric of time. And I do believe they're from another reality. I don't think they stay around that long. So of course, the only thing we can go by is the sightings that people give to us. And, we have had sightings of these things just suddenly showing up. And we have also had sightings where people state that they see these things suddenly disappear, like they're going through an invisible doorway of some type.
Really? Now, now let me ask you: is there any incidences or sightings of anything specifically in the kind of pattern of Mothman prior to the Point Pleasant incidents?
Oh, there've been instances of people seeing wing-like humanoids. As you go back further and further, it's either part of some type of Native American lore, First Nations lore, or what people will call an angel.
Right.
Back then it was, they always tried to associate with something either religious or something part of their culture. So, I'm quite sure there were many more being seen back there. I just don't think it's a 20th, 21st century phenomena.
Right. Well, I could also see it, I mean, just through that kind of lens back then, people were so religiously focused and, faith centric in their perception of things, back in the Middle Ages or whatever, they're going to automatically associate whatever phenomenon they're seeing, through that religious lens. So I'm wondering if, even these angel sightings back in the day, if they, um, I don't know. I mean, angels are always coming bringing prophecy, right? So even just through our modern lens, we're when the Point Place incidents happened, like people associated it with the tragedy that was happening. And the first sighting was in November '66, correct? That was like a year before the bridge collapse.
Yeah, it was about a year between the first sighting and the bridge collapse.
So for those who don't or aren't familiar with the Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, can you give us a rundown on just that whole strand of sightings and how it all played out?
Well, in late '66, there were a particular area called the West Virginia Ordnance Works, or what people refer to as a TNT plant. And it was kind of a teenager, young adult hangout area. And this being that what people called the Mothman, with these large red eyes and these moth-like wings, and somewhat aggressive, was being seen. This thing was basically chasing cars down the road leading from the TNT plant. And as well, there were other sightings in areas in and around Point Pleasant, a few sightings across the river in Ohio. So this all happened for about a year. Out of all the sightings that I have looked into, I believe there were probably 30 to 35 that had some credibility to them.
Right.
So, of course, getting near the holiday season in 1967, the bridge, the Silver Bridge that spanned across the Ohio River between Point Pleasant and Ohio, had a lot of traffic on it one night, and it just suddenly collapsed, and 46 people plunged to their death. And after it was investigated, it was discovered that there were some structure problems on the bridge. Now, someone stated that they had seen this Mothman fly above the bridge not long before the actual collapse, which is all anecdotal evidence. So, and actually, this being a small town with that many people dying, I believe that people were just trying to find an excuse as to why this happened.
Right.
That does happen a lot when there's tragedy. So, of course, John Keel wrote about the phenomenon, and he had been investigating it. Plus, there was other stuff going on too. The Men in Black, there were UFO sightings, a lot of paranormal activity. So, it kind of all tied in together. So, that harbinger, a portent of doom theory kind of stuck with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's like the first time, I guess you could say that, a modern consciousness was able to attach itself to, something with a lot of validity, like, as it relates to like a winged humanoid, because, I mean, you had that many different cases. So let me ask you, as far as Keel went, was there that much of a direct correlation that was portrayed in the movie, or was that just, him trying to sell books?
Oh, I don't know. I can't speak for him. Of course, he was a journalist.
Right.
And, he may have embellished on some of the story. I can't really say. The movie itself, it followed the book to a degree, but I mean, there was a lot of different stuff added to that movie as opposed to what Keel reported. Yeah. Though some of the strange activity was reported. So, the movie itself kind of brought the tale of the Mothman out there for the general public, even though it was known, it wasn't widely known.
Right, right. Well, then I don't know, man. The movie just doesn't do the Mothman justice because
No.
that was my introduction to him. Back when I was in high school, and then you start doing your own research, and I mean, it's a fun rabbit hole to go down as far as the cryptos go. Like Mothman's one of my favorites, just because I mean, there's so much ambiguity to him. So let me ask you, as far as like all the different sightings, is there any specific similarities that you've noticed between them? And is there any like sort of pattern to these experiences?
What are you talking about, Point Pleasant or
Uh,
overall?
just overall with the Mothman.
Uh, now, I think the sightings that were in Point Pleasant, other than it being a humanoid-like being and some of them having red eyes,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, compared to what happened in Chicago, I mean, they're different. They are a different being. Um, the Chicago sightings were of a 5 to 6 foot tall, emaciated like humanoid with a very darkened color, had legs, uh, wings for the most part that were shaped like that of a bat or a gargoyle, anywhere from 10 to 15 foot in width. And some had the red eyes, some didn't. Now, there were some differences. Some of them had a ray-like structure coming off the back of the head. The body, the head itself was not part of the body. I mean, no neck. There was a head, but it was a smaller head.
It was like floating over the body.
What's that?
I said you said it was like separated, like almost it was like it was floating over the body.
No, it was attached to the body. But in the Mothman, the descriptions of the Mothman Point Pleasant was like that of a moth, where the eyes were kind of inset the upper body, as opposed to what people were seeing in Chicago. Now, many of the representations of the Mothman in Point Pleasant, I mean, there were all kinds of representations. You look at the statue that they have in Point Pleasant now, it doesn't really look like any of the representations that people were giving of this being.
Right, right.
It's much different. But what people have been seeing in Chicago is a different type of being. But right now at this point, we have 103 sightings that we believe are very credible. We have had sightings that we didn't believe are credible, so we just didn't include those. But for the most part, the descriptions are pretty similar.
Now that was 103 sightings in total, or just in Chicago?
In total, I'm talking
Okay.
about the whole area in and around Lake Michigan, but
Right,
mostly 200 to 200-mile radius from Chicago out into southern Wisconsin, Illinois, into northern Indiana.
So I guess temperamentally, if you were to look, and we'll just focus on the Midwestern sightings. What sort of stories do you usually run into? I mean, is this one like chasing down cars still, or is it different in its behaviors?
No, it's more passive. Most of the sightings are just that, sightings. It just happens to be seen at a certain area at a certain time. Very, very little aggression. The only aggression would be if, I think the most aggressive actual encounter was that in a little village in Chicago, where this couple were sitting in their car and this thing landed on the hood of the car.
Oh wow, just staring them down.
Yeah. So that was probably, and it kind of made some attempt to get through the windshield. That was probably the most aggressive out of all these sightings. There have been sightings or encounters where people have walked up to one of these things, but there was no aggression. But there was some physical manifestation because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, the witness would become very weak, feel sick, have a foreboding feeling. That happened a few times. So, but all in all, the descriptions have been pretty consistent.
So have they had any sort of like physical interactions with the being? Like, when you said, one was able to almost like walk up to it. Like, were they able to touch it or communicate with it?
I don't know of anybody touching it, or trying to make some type of communication. I think most of these witnesses were really shocked about what they were
Oh
looking at.
yeah.
I mean, that's why we just haven't gotten photographs, because if you're out and about and your phone's in your pocket and this thing just suddenly shows up for a couple of seconds and takes off, you're not going to have much opportunity to take a photograph of it.
Right, right.
So yeah, there's a lot of shock to value associated with this, but they do they show up mostly at nighttime, and they're also very fleeting sightings. So it's not like they're sticking around waiting for photographs. They're gone.
Right, right. Well, I don't know. What do you think is one of the reasons why, it would, I don't know, want to focus on Chicago? I mean, was there like any like specific neighborhoods it was mostly focusing on, or was it just overall all over the city in different ways?
Where there were areas that it did concentrate on at different times. Earlier, we were getting sightings along the lakefront. A lot of sightings up and down the lakefront, Navy Pier, then up toward some of the upper neighborhoods down in South Chicago. But specific neighborhoods where the sightings were concentrated,
Mm-hmm.
Little Village, which is a majority Hispanic neighborhood, had 8 sightings that we know of. And Lincoln Park was another area that several sightings were made. And in and around Cicero, we had some some groups of sightings as well.
Right.
Then, of course, we had some sightings in Northwest Indiana. And so, yeah, I mean, but like I said, all in all, these sightings, especially later, the past year and a half or so, they've been more widespread, though we still get sightings in the city.
Now, I mean, that's very interesting to me that would be, primarily focused in like Little Village, Cicero, because like you had mentioned, those are Hispanic neighborhoods, and
Mm-hmm.
the Hispanic culture, for the most part, tends to be more faith oriented. I mean, do you think a person's faith or outlook on paranormal activity allows them to be more susceptible to kind of witnessing these things or grabbing a sneak peek at them, or do you think it's just more random?
Well, we've taken that in consideration. We've even gone to the point where these may be some type of summoned being or a sentinel because of the high drug trade in those areas.
Okay.
That maybe the gangs were somehow manifesting these beings
Like Santeria?
through sometimes Santeria, like you said, or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. We have looked into that, and through our interviews and such, we just really haven't been able to say that's the case.
Right, right.
The one interesting thing is that most of the sightings in those areas, these things were described as either black demons or some type of demon.
Huh.
So
Now it's funny that they have more of an outlook of a or a more of a traditional look of a gargoyle or a demon, but behavior wise, these are more passive than other sightings in the past. Correct?
well, they're more passive than what was seen in Point Pleasant.
Gotcha.
They show up. They might make a little noise or scare the hell out of somebody, or just show up real quick and scare somebody. But very rarely do they show any type of aggression. And aggression, when I say aggression, I mean like maybe taking a step or two in someone's direction, then
Right,
backing
right,
off.
right, right.
That's about it. Now, things have changed a little bit in recent times, the past 6 months, of course. Since the beginning of October, we've been getting a lot of sightings in and around O'Hara International. And there have been a few caveats coming up because of that. And, we've kind of changed our thinking about this thing a bit, though we still really don't know what we're running into.
Now, I guess, as far as the Chicago sightings go, is there any, select stories or sightings that really stood out to you when you were doing your research?
Well, where people saw these things in flight, not really. It would either be one person or a real big group of people would see this thing flying about, and then it would just take off and disappear. Most of the sightings in the city were very quick sightings, but those sightings there were encounters. Well, in particular, the one in Bolingbrook, Illinois, which was an actual encounter. This lady had a habit of going out about 10 o'clock in the evening and walking around her neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to cut through this playground. So one evening she was walking through the playground on the pavement, and there was something standing in the pavement, and it was huge. The thing stood maybe 9 to 10 foot in height.
Oh,
and
wow.
She first thought it was two people embracing, and that maybe there was an umbrella or something extending up above them. But when she got closer to this thing, she heard gargling sounds from this thing. I believe it was actually sleeping, standing up, but it did turn, and it turned towards her. That's when she realized it was one being and not two people embracing. The wings on this thing were wrapped around the body, and the top tips of the wings were what the extension was above it. So this was a huge being, and it was dark in color. And as she looked at it, and she said she was probably about 15 foot away from it,
Mm-hmm.
her knees started to get very weak, and she basically had to walk away as quickly as she could and find some place to sit down and gather herself. And she said she had to sit for about 5 minutes before she regained some strength, so where she could get around and go home. And when she got home, she told her son about it. He wanted to go find it himself.
Yeah.
So they got in
I.
the car. They got in the car and drove the half block, and it was only like a half block away, to in the direction of the playground. And they saw this thing above the hedges, kind of making its way out of the hedges. And they never saw any eyes or anything. It was just this large being. It never unfurled its wings, but she was so freaked out by it. When they got home, she immediately called me. She found, I don't know what she searched on Google, but she found my phone number, and she called me and told me about it. So I probably talked to her maybe a half an hour after she had seen this. So that's probably one of the closest encounters. There was another one in Chicago on the lakefront where this couple had been visiting the woman's mother, who lived in a condominium right on the lakefront, right on Lakeshore Drive.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about 9 o'clock in the evening. It was dark, and as they were walking in front of the condo before they were going to take a right to go to the entrance, this something huge and dark in color flew right in front of them and flew up above the trees, up the side of the condo, which I believe was either 10 to 12 stories high, and stopped and hovered in midair as if it was looking through one of the windows. And so they saw this, and they freaked, and they started running towards the entrance to the condominium. So as they were doing this, this thing kind of tilted back and made a dive down into the trees. And as they were running towards the door, it hovered and descended right in front of them. And it was actually hovering like a few feet off the ground and vibrating. And the description they gave me was it was, this humanoid with this emaciated body, with the red eyes and bat-like wings. With the wings were fully extended, and it was the feet and legs were actually vibrating. They could feel the vibration. The woman actually passed. She didn't pass out, but she fell to the ground. It affected her that bad. And it was probably in front of them for like 10 to 15 seconds, then slowly ascended up into the air and took off. And he picked her up and took her in. Now, I know there were other people that saw it because there was a delivery van near there by the street where they heard the guy commenting about it, saying something, and got in and took off. And they saw a flash from across the street where somebody had taken a photograph. And I've been trying to track this photograph down since then. Now, the one thing that has become frustrating about these sightings is that, first of all, the city isn't giving us any help at all. As far as with cameras and, anything that they have out, we're not getting any footage. Any of the security companies at any of the businesses, that condominium in particular, I couldn't get any cooperation from them. So it's been difficult to find verification for what people are seeing. Now, this couple, they were visiting from Washington, D.C., and the husband is actually a professional athlete in the Washington, D.C. area. And when I talked to them the next day, I definitely verified who it was. So I don't think their story was a farce. I mean, I think they actually experienced something. And in fact, they were supposed to fly back to Washington that day and had to delay it for 2 days because she just wasn't going to leave the apartment, I mean, the condo.
Oh, yeah.
She was just shook up. So I did talk to them when they got back home, and they did verify who they were and everything. So, yeah. So those are probably the Bolingbrook and the Lakeshore Drive sightings were probably the closest encounters that people have experienced.
Man, that Lakeshore Drive one is just like frightening as well because I don't know, the whole vibration angle of it, it definitely was creating some sort of an energy pulse from its body and projecting it on him like almost like a psychic attack, you know what I mean? But
well, I think it was a psychic attack for the most part. And the one thing about these sightings as well is very few times has this thing been seen flapping its wings, especially a propulsion from the ground. It seems to shoot up like a rocket.
Well, I mean, if it has the ability to
that's
generate.
something similar to what I had personally seen in an encounter in 1988.
Yeah.
Where the thing has this being, and I saw a very similar being with red eyes that just literally shot up into the air without unfurling its wings. So, Chicago's the only place this thing's been seen. I mean, I've been getting these similar descriptions all over North America. And in fact, I've got a book coming out this week or next week, which is called Winged Cryptids, Humanoids, Monsters, and Anomalous Creatures Casebook, where I do describe these later sightings in Chicago, plus other winged cryptid sightings and investigations that I've had personally.
So So, do you think that the sightings in Chicago are just an entirely different species than the ones in Point Pleasant?
Oh, I do. I really do. And I think there's more than one too. In fact, I believe, and I believe this pretty early, that there were at least three at that time in 2017, and there very well may be more now.
Hmm. So let me ask you, as far as like your theories behind, what they are, do you think they're like maybe like scouts sent from, different, UFOs or alien races to kind of look at how people live, or do you lean towards more that occult angle?
Well, I tell you, the recent sightings in and around O'Hara have kind of steered me in a direction to where these may be related to either UFOs or extraterrestrials. And the reason I say that, we had a sighting in Rosemont by a lady who was in a park in the evening. Um, and she actually saw one of these winged beings in the company of an alien gray and two female humanoids.
Hmm. And
And she, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say by the humanoids, you're talking the tall blondes, right?
Now, these humanoids look like regular human females.
Okay.
Uh, but the one aspect of this that makes it very unusual, if it wasn't unusual in itself, was that she witnessed a bright blue flash of light where the alien gray and the two humanoids suddenly disappeared, and this winged being just walked off and ascended into the air.
Hmm.
Now, this woman, very hesitant about talking about her encounter because she later had a someone approach her about her sighting who should not have known anything about it.
Like a
My
Man in Black.
my team were the only ones that were told about this, but someone approached her and mentioned to her about the sighting and that she shouldn't be talking to anybody about it. And this happened at her job site. She was really shook up about that. Almost like a Men in Black type of thing, though
Yeah.
this individual wasn't dressed in all dark black or whatever. It was, this gentleman was in like a brownish coat, but I mean, he just walked up to her and mentioned the sighting and mentioned that she shouldn't say much to anybody about it, and just took off. And she was very hesitant to come forward, though I was able to get as much information as I think I could have
Mm-hmm.
from her, but I believe her 100% because some of the things she did tell us were very credible, and the location and everything. So it was that sighting. Then there was another interesting incident that happened to O'Hara about 2 months ago, where now there's I don't know how many people know this, but there's a small cemetery located within the O'Hare International property.
Oh,
It's
really?
Rest Haven Cemetery, and it's actually near some of the cargo areas. Well, this one gentleman reported to Manuel Navarrete, who was part of our team, the Fans of Monsters 14 Research, and he's been receiving the bulk of these reports because he works for a trucking company and has access to some of these cargo areas. So anyway, this gentleman contacted him and told him that he was out on break one evening, and I think it was like 1 o'clock in the morning or so, and it's very near this cemetery, and he literally saw an oval-shaped, brightly lit UFO hovering over the cemetery, and as it did, some type of humanoid was being lifted up into the craft.
Hmm.
Now, the first thing I asked was whether this thing had wings. and he said he couldn't tell. But the fact that we've been getting all these winged humanoid sightings on the O'Hara property, and we've been getting some of the witnesses have been actual security people, including a TSA security man, tends to add some credibility to the sighting. So I don't know, those two stories from in and around, the airport have kind of got me thinking about there being a UFO or extraterrestrial aspect to these.
Well, I mean, I could definitely see that, and particularly with the one encounter that the lady had seen. I mean, it had to have been a man in black in some sort of undercover getup, because I mean, if she had only talked to you guys, then they probably pulled that metadata straight from her phone. I mean, they have to have connections with the NSA, no problem. But I don't know. Is this the only time that you've ever come across one of these winged humanoids actually, interacting with a humanoid and a gray at the same time? Or
that's the only time.
Huh?
That is the only time. And all in all, these sightings around the airport have been pretty unusual because I don't know. It just seems that we have no idea why they've been concentrated around the airport. In the cargo areas near the actual runways, most of them have been seen by the fences that come in between the tarmacs and the cargo areas. Because of our reporting of these incidents, there have been a lot of people going out there trying to look for these things, and of course, the security people have been inundated with trespassers over the past couple of months, and I've been hearing about it. I've had people who actually work for O'Hara who have told me about it. They're trying to keep this as quiet as possible, but we're luckily we're having people that are part of the security of the airport and some of the cargo companies coming forward. So there's definitely something going on. Now, why this is happening, I just don't know. But in the O'Hara area, and I'm talking about Rosemont, which is northeast of O'Hara, and on the property itself, we've had 9 sightings since October 1st.
And now I have all of these different sightings since October. Have they been kind of corresponding to where the graveyard would be, or is that on the other side of the airport?
No, it's been all around the area. I mean, it's not just particularly in that area. It's been, it's been the whole area. I mean, I even received an old report from a neighborhood just southwest of the airport the other day. So, there has been activity before, but for whatever reason, people are seeing these things more and more now.
So let me ask you, what do you think the UFO Connection is? I mean, do you think they're sending them out as like information gathering scouts, trying to put together our just different ways people live? Because I mean, when I think of the UFO phenomenon, I always think of it from a research angle, right? They're trying to gather as much information about our culture and the differences between our subcultures as possible to have an understanding of humanity as a whole. But I mean, what do you think the intention of sending these things out around Chicago is?
I have no idea, really. I mean, I just don't know what the real connection is, and I kind of don't want to really make any type of statements that say that are definite connection.
Right,
it's just interesting that we have had this UFO sighting and something being pulled up into one of these craft, as well as an alien-like being and others seen around one of these beings within the past 6 months. So we've got to take that in consideration as far as the theory now. We've been working with so many theories over the past 3 years that It's kind of really hard to pinpoint why it's happening. I don't think there's a specific reason why.
Mm-hmm.
There may be different factions of working together on this, but why they chose the area of the upper Midwest in and around Chicago and Lake Michigan, I really have no idea.
Well, let me ask you, between Point Pleasant and Chicago, were there any like local or localized area where sightings had been it, or just were they sporadic between the two?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say it was more sporadic. Yeah, more sporadic. I mean, the thing about Chicago is this is the first time we've had a large group of sightings in an urban area. That's what kind of sets this whole thing apart.
Yeah.
Now, why that has happened, there's no real explanation for it. We've looked into the occult. We've looked into a lot of different things. There's just no real rhyme or reason to it. The only thing that correlates, to the different areas is that they all, for the most part, these beings look the same. They react the same. But that's about it,
Yeah, yeah.
until we get some real evidence, where we can kind of grab onto it and kind of expand it from there. Right now it's all speculation. I say I really hate to say that that's the reason why, because I got a feeling that we're going to be looking into this phenomenon for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't know. The one thing that is kind of like new and exciting about this is the eyewitnesses show that there was a biological phenomena that was like generating that psychic energy, and I mean I just I find it interesting that one, this is the first time they've been seen in an urban area, and two, they're like projecting this energy that gives you an overwhelming sense of dread and like these biological ineptitudes, right? But I don't know. It's very interesting because it's almost correlative to the experience one would have with like the black-eyed children, which is also, from what I've read, a more urban centric crypto.
Yeah, I mean they are mostly concentrated around towns and cities, but there have been some out in the sticks. I mean, there have been a few, but yeah, they mostly are involved in areas of populated areas. Yeah.
Now, for those of us that don't really know, can you give us a rundown on what your thoughts on the black-eyed children are?
That's another enigma. I mean, really, it's I over the years I've had different theories on these things. The first thing that most of people that were researching were noticing that these things were kids. I mean, they were kids with these black eyes. They usually ran around a group of two or three. That they would just show up at somebody's door wanting to come in, use the phone or whatever, and the witnesses would be really freaked out and deny their access, and they just seemed to move off and go to somewhere else. I mean, that was most of the sightings. Now we have been receiving more and more black-eyed adult sightings over the years. The actual behavior is about the same. They seem to be very laissez-faire, if you want to say that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really seem to care what people think of them or see in them. But I have sightings all over the country. Even in Great Britain, we've had sightings, and I don't know what they are. If they, you talk about the men in black, are they the same type of being? This kind of, I don't know, being, is this type of humanoid that seems to be focused on one thing. I don't know if that's what these things are something associated with that or not.
Right.
It's a very weird phenomena that just totally freaks people out. And, they just seem to show up at the weirdest times, the weirdest places. Even in the middle of the winter, we've had sightings where they just be walking around without coats or something during a snowstorm or whatever. It just is just no rhyme or reason to it.
I mean, the one thing I love about the black-eyed children stories is that, like, they all came about at the internet, like, right at the same time. Like, they just all popped up at once. People on Reddit boards sharing their experiences, and, they'd never really, like, thought of it. And, I mean, the similarity that they're all asking for you to, can we come in? Like, I don't know, it's just so reminiscent of vampires. I always thought I always thought it had some connection to vampirism, and I always wondered, what the correlation of of the sightings in the cities were with maybe certain types of vampiric activity, because you look at Chicago, Seattle, like there's a very rich kind of vampire kink subculture in a lot of these major cities, and I've always wondered if there's any sort of correlation to that.
It may very well be. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there have been a lot of sightings in these areas that do seem to have that type of culture in it. But then again, it doesn't really seem to be a pattern as to why these things show up at certain places. I don't think they're a meme. I don't think they're something that was internet generated, as opposed to like Slender Man and some of these other beings that are memes or possibly thought form manifestations. I just think these are real beings that just seem to have some very unusual qualities, let alone the black eyes.
Well, I mean, see, and that's something that I always find very interesting as well, as these kind of thought form beings, because coming from a Jungian perspective, right? Slender Man, you can, definitely see him taking a thought form being, because in, your personal unconscious, right, that's influenced by, the media that you take in, you could definitely project that out. But some of these other cryptos, I've always thought about them being manifestations of the collected unconscious, so they can manifest the same for different people. And I don't know, you just kind of look at the Mothman from that perspective. Their sightings always tend to follow a place where there's going to be a disaster. Or, I mean, if you look at Chicago in those neighborhoods, like the gang violence, the violence in general, like it just creates a very particular kind of energy that's, it's angsty, it's anxious, people are always on their toes, and like that kind of energy can be manifested into these kind of forms. Have you ever looked at it from maybe an interdimensional being that, exists or that is perceived by the unconscious mind?
Oh yeah, I have looked into thought form, Tulpa, Servitor, the whole theory. I really can't find any evidence to support that, but it's just one of many theories. And I quite frankly, thought forms are something that paranormal has been dealing with from the very beginning. I mean, poltergeist activity is nothing but thought form.
Really? Go into that a little bit.
Oh yeah, yeah. Poltergeist is nothing but an unconscious manifestation by an individual. And because of the circumstances, either being some type of dysfunction, illness, or other related activity, it's an unconscious thought form or manifestation from usually a child.
Okay.
That just goes awry.
Now,
And it kind of develops a life of its own.
Now, see, I always thought it was, maybe like thought forms being taken from like energy of traumatic events that have happened in a place in the past. But you're saying it's from like a child who might be experiencing neglect, trauma, something along those lines?
Oh yeah, that's what we have. Yeah, that's what we have found for the most part. I mean, a lot of activity that seems to be related to a poltergeist or some type of noisy activity or something taking things. There are beings or spirits or energies that will do that, but those are completely different than a poltergeist. The poltergeist, basically, like I said before, is a manifestation, usually from a child who's in and around the puberty age, where a lot of hormone changes and such. And there are issues in the family, personal issues with the child, even some type of mental issues that just seem to culminate into the perfect storm, and they unconsciously manifest some type of energy that has a life of its own. I have worked several poltergeist cases in the past. I've done a lot of this stuff in private with clients, and I've seen it. I have literally seen it, and it's not something that you can just move on. It's something that the person itself has to be made to realize that they are the reason behind it, and they've just got to change, the way they live, the way they think, in order to stop the activity.
So you don't think? Well, let me ask you. Just them like realizing that they're generating it. Have you found any correlation between poltergeist activities and certain like mental illnesses that the person might be experiencing, or any certain types of psychosis that goes along with it?
It can. I haven't really seen that, though I have read of cases where that very well could have happened. It all seems like a horror movie when you start thinking about it, but it's I think severe mental illness, schizophrenia can definitely lead into a poltergeist-like phenomena, but I haven't personally seen it myself.
Huh, I mean that's an interesting way to look at it, because I always interpreted the movie The Shining like that.
Mhm.
The kid has the psychic powers, and I mean, if you read into the subtext that Kubrick put into that movie, Jack Nicholson's character has sexually abused the kid in the past. So once they get to this place, he's able to use his powers or his shine as a way to just like drive his dad insane, as opposed to the traditional ghost story. But that's getting off on a rant, I digress.
But no, that is very close to what poltergeist activity is. They don't necessarily do it because they want to,
Right.
but because the situation and the energy that's available to them, they're in a certain surrounding where it has it does kind of culminate into some type of entity. Yeah, I mean, that could very well be considered a poltergeist.
Now, let me ask you: do you think like poltergeist activity in some ways could be someone with a latent psychic ability that like a certain area, Shining being the Overlook Hotel, that brings out or manifests that energy or that gift that they really either weren't realizing that they had, or that they had been consciously maybe suppressing without realizing it.
Oh, I've been working a case for over a decade now that has happened and continues to go on. It's mostly kids, who are what I call beacons, that have the ability to sense spirit energy and energy in itself is just attracted to them.
Yeah.
Uh, Unfortunately, when they don't understand what's going on, it can expand itself into something more sinister. It's worse off when the child and the parents have the same abilities, and it kind of expands out. That's what I'm dealing with this certain case I've been on for a long time. It's nothing really I can do about it. It's just a matter of me letting them know what is going on, why it's happening, and how to get them to deal with it in a way where it's manageable,
Right.
and that's basically all you can do.
Now, let me ask you: do you think that they like, you said both the parent and the child had these kind of abilities?
Mhm.
Do you think it was like, or them like creating thought forms that are just like in conflict with each other?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in this case in particular, there has already been some underlying spirit energy in the area. So I think the thought form that they have developed or manifested did kind of coincide with the spirits or energies that were already there.
Mm-hmm.
That does happen. Even if it's very benign energy, it can expand it out to where it becomes more powerful or gain more energy. Uh, I think that does happen, and I know this does happen, has happened there. It's not very common, but like I said again, I've seen it happen.
Now let me ask you, just like, is this, are these like this energy or this ability that these kids have? Is this something that, that if they work on it, they can kind of develop, kind of like the movie The Sixth Sense, or is it something that just kind of fades over time as they get older?
Oh, it can fade off. I'm an intuitive myself. It did fade for me for a while, then came back later. Uh, I think it can fade with a child, especially when they're grown up and start life starts happening where they're out working or getting married and have a family and such. They got
Right,
more
right.
things in their mind as opposed to what's going on unconsciously. And they either don't realize what's going on, or and they're not aware of it, or they just get used to it. I mean, that happens as well. Uh, but that's what I have tried to do with a lot of these kids. Tried to get them to realize, through permission of the parents, of course, that what is really going on. And most times it's the parents consulting me
Mm-hmm.
to figure out and to explain to them what's going on, and then the person will help the child. And the thing you can do the most is just to reassure them that, yeah, you do have this ability, but not to let it control you, and then give them steps. And these steps are always proportioned to what is actually each person can handle on their own. So just give them the tools to kind of tamp it down a bit and to kind of control it with themselves.
Yeah. Huh. Now, well, I don't know. I guess I want to get your read on this because I was a counselor working with abused kids for years and years, and the agency that I worked for was actually they had built out the old Mantino Mental Institution. If you're familiar with the ghost stories, attached to the old mental institution in Mantino, definitely check it out. But yeah, they had like renovated a bunch of these buildings in there, and a lot of the old tunnels and all that, and like a lot of the old like dilapidated buildings, still surrounded us, right? So it definitely had a very eerie kind of environment. And I had visuals of ghost sightings and this and that, when I worked the late nights there. Some of it, was definitely like, I'd work two doubles in a row and I was, leaving, caught something out of the corner of my eye, sort of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were a little bit more pronounced. But one of the things that I would do is I was the art therapy guy, right? So we'd be doing a lot of, sand trays, house tree person, that sort of stuff. And one of the things I had them start doing was drawing their dreams. And this is, mind you, confidential, one-on-one sessions with different kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they all started talking about the man in the hat. He was a
Mm-hmm.
shadowy guy who lived under one of the old buildings, and they all had him under, the same building, right? And he would show up in their dreams, and he would just have them do bad things. Like one of the kids, he had it was. He had been estranged from his sister, right? And his sister was pregnant, and like one of his dreams was the Shadow Man or the Man in the Hat would have him, cut open his sister, take the baby, and like chuck it into oncoming traffic, right? Like just do these horrendous, horrible things, and he kind of fed off that like pain. And I always like, kind of, maybe put it through the thought form angle, right? That they were attaching themselves subconsciously to this energy that existed in that place from probably, I mean, the Mantino Mental Institution, they didn't even have a graveyard there. They just burned the bodies, and there was a bunch of bad experiments that went there. But, before I kind of go, and let you kind of assess, that idea of the Hat Man, to finish up the story, one of the kids, he literally had a psychosis, and he ran out the building, and we chased after him, right? And kids would go on run often. They usually go hide out, for a couple hours, whatever the case would be. But since he was, a self-harmer, I went down into the tunnels because that's where I thought he was. And I followed it down, underneath the building where they all said the Hat Man was. And I heard like whispering and like breathing. So I thought the kid was down here afraid, whatever the case would be, right? And then I get there, and it was just a cold. And then I look up, and on the pipeline of like, this underground tunnel to walk from these old buildings, there was dozens and dozens and dozens of crucifixes hanging from the pipes. And I did a little research. The building was actually the old kids ward, right? So every time a child died, the rumor is that one of the nurses would go down there and hang a rosary. So I'm wondering if the kids were having some sort of thought form off, the energy of all those deaths in that particular area and like the tragedy associated with it.
I doubt that. I think this is probably a shadow person, shadow energy that found the right place to where it could feed off the dysfunction, the mental illness, the pain of the kids. And it was there for so long, and it kept being fed for so long that it had no reason to leave.
Yeah.
And I think that, it could have been something that went on for decades. I don't think it was a thought form. I think this was an actual entity. If you know anything about shadow people, these things kind of are opportunistic beings that have no association with any spirits. They're just a malevolent energy that is dangerous. It can basically feed off the life force of a human being. And they show up in places where I said before there's dysfunction, or there is, and they do love hanging around young kids and the elderly that are sick and such. And if they find a location where they can find the energy and continue to be believed, they will hang on there. They will stay there for a long time.
Yeah, because, well, I mean, I don't know. I haven't had experiences with shadow people like that, but I did used to have sleep paralysis as a kid. So I definitely have had that experience with maybe, shadow people, I don't know, manifesting maybe once or twice. It was usually just that like pressure on your chest and that like feeling of dread.
Yeah, that's an entirely different being. That's not a shadow person. These shadow people, the ones that I'm talking about, I mean, they're pure malevolency that they just kind of hang out and keep hanging out, and they stay there until the energy that they need to feed on is gone. When you go to a location where people are seeing these beings and it turns out to be one of these malevolent shadow people, the best thing to do is to deprive this energy of the ability to, sustain itself. And that usually involves a lot of, a lot of changing of the ways. It maybe therapy where people start to not cause dysfunction or do things that kind of tend to feed these beings. And that's basically the only way to get rid of it. You hear of a lot of different ways that people get rid of it. Most times when someone goes into one of these places and if this energy is so strong, they just tell them to leave, if it's that bad.
Right. Now let me ask you then. So you said that they're different. So what's the main differences between your traditional sleep paralysis, shadow person experience, as they would say, versus this kind of malevolent force that's more in tune with like an interdimensional being?
I think most people experience sleep paralysis at some point. I think it's a natural thing more than something that's related to an energy. I know I'm going to get people that are going to disagree with that, but I think, and I see this a lot with people who go through an abduction or experiencer scenario where they have sleep paralysis or have paralysis when they wake, when they're in the presence of some type of being, especially like an extraterrestrial type being or alien type being.
Right.
I think it's either something where the body shuts everything down, either in fear or shock, or it's just something that's associated with actual sleep itself, to where the body has kind of relaxed itself to a point where it takes a little while for things to kick back in and the things go back to normal. I mean, I hear a lot about sleep paralysis, and I think it's a more natural phenomenon than anything else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's one of the reasons why I just learned to sleep on my stomach when I was a kid. But
I've heard people do that too.
Yeah. I mean, I used to get it really bad when I was a kid, and it would happen all the time. And then, I just started changing my sleeping patterns. So then let me ask you, I guess, focusing on the more like vampiric entity of a shadow person. What are your thoughts on them? I mean, you think it's like a traditional kind of interdimensional being? Do you think it's like a sort of demonic energy? Or do you think it's just like, I've heard also the theory that they're like imprints of, other dimensions on our dimension?
That could be. I mean, that will explain some of the aspects of it. But I kind of describe them as being like a predator. Say you got this neighborhood with houses lined up and down the street. I mean, I can just sense like these shadow people walking down the street and being able to tell which house they're going or which household they're going to go into just by the negative energy coming out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they go for a while. I just think they're like parasites, predators. I mean, they feed off dysfunction. They feed off unhappiness for the most part.
So
now, where they come from?
Yeah,
I don't think anybody really knows that. I don't believe that they are spirit based at all. Could they be some type of interdimensional or being from a parallel? Yeah, absolutely. There's just no real reason or any explanation as to why they are where they are.
Yeah.
Do they kind of move along different parallel dimensions and kind of pop into ours for whatever reason, I think that's possible as well.
I mean, this is just my take on it, just because, I mean, having come, well, I don't know, it's going to be a bad phrase, but coming face to face with one of these things, I don't know, energy wise, it felt like being in the presence of like someone like, has been seriously into the occult, on which I've met, quite a few. And I don't know, this is just my interpretation. I'd like to get your thoughts on it. So, what if you had someone who was, a practicing occultist, an adept perhaps, on the left hand path that was I don't know, basically an energy vampire, right? They had like
Hmm.
formatted themselves to where they can suck the energy from living people, which a lot of occultists do, and then using that energy over the course of a lifetime to create an astral imprint of themselves, to where, I mean, kind of like a shadow of themselves that exists between dimensions, so they really can't move on, but suck up that energy to keep themselves existing between worlds, as opposed to being forced to move on to the next plane.
I think it's possible. I have known some people who were actual energy vampires.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that just literally sucked the life out of people.
Right.
Uh, Now, as far as leaving an imprint, I think all living beings leave an imprint of some type. I mean, when you die, your life force stays on this plane for a certain amount of time, but it eventually goes off into another level, and I think there's always an imprint left. People that can't move on or won't move on, I mean, their life force, their energy stays on this plane. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason behind that. It's either because they don't know they're dead, uh, or they believe they need to stay around, or they're so frustrated and so evil that you know they just believe if they do move on, they're going to hell or someplace other than what they believe is a heaven.
Right.
I think a lot. I mean, that's why spirit activity. That's the reason for spirit activity. But as far as these energy vampires, they've got their own belief system as to what uh, happens to them in the afterlife. But yeah, I think they definitely could leave an imprint.
Now, what do they believe happens to them when they move on? Is it more of
Oh,
a
that I don't know. I
okay?
don't know that.
Okay, I was wondering if they have like more of like a Judeo-Christian perspective on it, or if they go if they're have like more of a Luciferian theology. But I guess they're not necessarily as organized as that.
Most of them I have met were uh, were Satanist. Yeah, they were Satanist. I mean, I don't know if I know of any that were either Christian or Jewish or any other Protestant religions at all,
Right.
Catholic. But I most that I have dealt with have been Satanist.
Now,
That may tend to lean to itself. I mean, as to what the deal is.
now, are we talking like Anton LaVey kind of Satanism, or are we talking like more like the hardcore stuff like Temple of Set?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not really into Satanist religion. Uh, I know there are all different levels of it,
Yeah.
uh, but I really don't know.
Yeah, because I don't know, I've always found the vampirism aspect interesting to certain people. Particularly people who might not even realize that they're doing it. Because
Mm.
when we were talking about how certain kids just kind of have that beacon energy to them. I feel like with a certain attitude, if people don't lose that ability, if they're just negative all the time and they create that thought form within themselves, then that energy is just going to be sucking it out of other people just to try and fill that void that they're creating for themselves, and they don't even
Mm.
realize they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite sure that does happen. Uh, you know, uh, but I think that's more of a conscious thing than anything else. I think that's something that they would need to be conscious about to be able to perform.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think that, it's not like a poltergeist or a manifestation, a thought form manifestation. This is something different. This is projection of some type consciously to where they can, and that's the way it's been explained to me. It's kind of a projection of energy.
Similar to kind of a projection energy that the Mothman had, right? Just kind of like
Possibly like people say there's like a, I don't know, some type of frequency or some type of ability to a low hertz abilities, to kind of affect people physically. Infrasound, like possibly. It may be. I mean, they may have that ability to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I mean, I don't know. There's the whole just the whole vampiric angle and how, you can find these kind of like predatory beings on every layer of the spiritual spectrum. I've just always found that interesting because I mean, they're the ones that are malignant, right? They're the ones that feed off of you. And I feel that like certain people who have certain negative self-image about themselves, like they can attract these things. And, a lot of times, once you start attracting them, you might not even realize that they're feeding off of you. And I feel like a lot of folks with like clinical depression, PTSD, soldiers coming back, they're very susceptible to these kinds of beings.
Yep. Yeah, susceptible is a good word for it. They kind of open themselves up to some type of attachment that can tend to do that to them.
Yeah, yeah. Now, have you done any research of possibly like soldiers while they're overseas, particularly in the wars we've been fighting in the Middle East, have found themselves I don't know, I guess bringing any like unwanted energies home, through their trauma, like jinn, anything along that line?
That whole jinn thing, as far as, there are instances where that very well could happen. I'm not as well versed in the jinn phenomena as opposed to some other people who have been.
Mm-hmm.
I know of soldiers who have experienced some really strange things over there. Encounters with strange beings, encounters with a lot of UFO activity, manifestations of huge beings, like I won't want to say genies, but something like that as well.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of stories over the years. I mean, ever since Desert Storm, actually, in the early 90s. I mean, I've heard of a lot of weird stuff.
Now, is there any like similarities between this this kind of phenomenon? Like, I don't want to say, they're popping out of lamps and, they have like, the same kind of demeanor, but like, do they have the same kind of look to them? Is there any real similarities?
No, I think that, there's a lot of, it's different.
Yeah.
It's always some type of manifested type of being, but I think it's more defined into something that's in the mind of the soldier themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have heard of all kinds of weird platoon encounters with beings that just should not be fathomable. Dinosaur-like beings, literally looking like huge dinosaurs and stuff like that.
So like serpents?
Ghouls of, like zombies that people have encountered out in the mountains of Afghanistan. It's a lot of strange stuff. Now, is it related to the culture out there? May very well be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not too familiar with the folklore and the traditions of the tribes in Afghanistan and into Iraq, but there's a lot of weird energy going on out there, and I think most soldiers that you talk to that have spent some time over there can relate at least one weird encounter of some type.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've always I've always found the jinn primarily interesting from like a mythological perspective because, I mean, with their creation story, man was made out of clay and jinn was made out of fire, and God gave man free will, but He didn't give free will to the jinn, so they've always been, a little bit more mischievous and had a little bit more malice towards man because of that. But I don't know. I guess the main difference between like the jinn and like angels and demons is that angels, demons, like they are categorically good and bad, right? The jinn, it really depends on which jinn you're talking to. Like they have such a wide range of emotions, and they don't really make their intentions known.
I don't think there's really a whole lot of difference. One's in the Quran, one's in the Bible, or in the Book of Enoch. I mean, they're going to find them, as well in Sumerian legends and such. I mean, I think a lot of this stuff tends to be the same thing. It's just expressed a different way.
Right. Well, we are actually getting to the end of the show. So once again, Lon, I do want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me, share a little bit about your experience, dealing with cryptozoology, as well as going into a little bit with the Chicago Mothman sightings. We had originally we're going to promote the book that you have out now, Mothman Dynasty, Chicago's Winged Humanoids, available on Amazon. But you have a new book coming out, and you said it's coming out next week?
Yeah, that book, I had released a book last year, which was Alien Disclosure, Experiencers Expose Reality, and that details experiencer relationships I've had with, in cases and such. I've had a lot of dealings with alien abductees and experiencers over the years. This new book, it's coming out next week, is Winged Cryptids, Humanoids, Monsters, and Anomalous Creatures Case Book. And this includes the later Chicago winged humanoid sightings and encounters up into present day, and including the O'Hara encounters, as well as other winged beings and unexplained entities that involved in cases that I have actually worked on. So these are cases that have been reported to me where I've had interaction with the witnesses, and I have looked into many of them. So, that's what that book is, and that's going to be on Amazon sometime next week.
Awesome. So, let me ask you, is that one on pre-order available, or is that just going to be ready to go next week?
It'll just be released a certain day. I'd say sometime mid next week.
Okay.
I got to still do the proofing on it, so there's not going to be a pre-order on it.
Okay, awesome. Well then,
but
folks,
if you go to Amazon, just go to Amazon and search my name, Lon Strickler. All my books will show up. I've got 7 books now, and this will be the 8th one.
Oh, fantastic! And people can catch your blog and stay informed on the crypto activity at www.phantomsandmonsters.com. Correct?
Right.
And is there any other social media handles you prefer folks to reach out to you at? Twitter, Instagram?
It doesn't matter. I'm everywhere. I've got a radio show I do every Friday night live at 9:00 Eastern, Arcane Radio. I have a variety of guests on there every week. So, I'm kind of got my thumb in a lot of pies.
Well, keep your finger in every pie, and I want to thank you again for coming on the show, sharing a little bit of time, and, just to kind of close, I guess I'd like to just get your take on this whole pandemic situation.
I don't know. This is something that we have been warned about for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very familiar with what happened with the Spanish flu back in the 1917, 1918. It's a wonder we haven't experienced something like this since that time. There have been small outbreaks. They've been kind of localized for the most part. But this whole coronavirus thing is... I just think it's something that was waiting to happen. And unfortunately, we should have been ready for it. And I just don't think we were. And I think it's going to change the way we live for the most part from here on out.
Yeah. And primarily with, the inevitable rising death toll, which could definitely be in the hundreds of thousands based on some conservative predictions. But I think in these times of pandemic, with such a shift of not only society but how we perceive reality in isolation, there's going to be a lot of sadness, there's going to be a lot of anger, there's going to be a lot of anxiety. But folks, keep a positive mind, because you never know what those negative thoughts may lure into your lives, whether it be shadow people, whether it be poltergeist activity. So stay positive, keep a hopeful outlook, and remember to never stop questioning. Good night, folks.